Okay, so what's the purpose of the Community Grants Program? The Community Grants Program supports not-for-profit organisations to develop activities, programs and services that benefit and respond to the current and emerging needs and interests in the Manningham community. The Community Grants Program has multiple objectives, so they're all listed here. What we look for is that our program objectives are aligned with the objectives of our partners, and our partners are our community organisations. They are you people that we partner with. So, firstly, there's partnerships, and we look to foster and develop partnerships between council groups and organisations for the delivery of shared outcomes. We want to deliver programs that deliver a program that delivers a range of programs and activities that respond to the needs of our Manningham community. It's important that the programs and activities align with council plans and strategies. When we talk about council plans and strategies, we're referring to our current council plan and our health and wellbeing strategy, and you can find those on our website. Okay, very important. Our objective is participation. We want to foster community involvement and participation with a focus on groups and individuals that experience barriers to participating in community life. Furthermore, skills development is a focus of ours, and we want to build community capacity and empower community members to develop or gain new skills and to enhance their quality of life. So that could be all sorts of skills, from, computer skills to, it could be just learning an instrument, people with, there's all sorts of activities that our community can that will enrich their life by learning new skills. The next one is innovation, and we're always looking for new ways to do things and innovative projects in our community. So we look to fund pilot activities that provide an innovative response to local priorities and ensure ongoing environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And finally, value, and that is, we want to see value for money, and we want to provide a measurable, cost-effective and efficient means to deliver community outcomes in a transparent and accountable manner, because we are dealing with public funds. So we are very, very accountable in the selection of our grant recipients. We have a very robust program in selecting and awarding grants. And, we also expect the organisations we partner with to be very accountable. So should you be fortunate enough to be awarded a grant, you will need to provide a completion report at the end. We'll talk about it later, and demonstrate how you've spent your council money. Okay, moving on. So who's eligible to apply for a grant? This is just a number of eligibility criteria. There are more in the grant guidelines on page 4, so please refer to them. This is not a full list, but we've picked out the most pertinent ones. And the applicant organisation must satisfy the eligibility criteria outlined in the grant guidelines. In order for your grant to be assessed, scored and recommended for funding, it must first satisfy these eligibility criteria. So who's eligible to apply for a grant? A not-for-profit organisation such as an incorporated association or company limited by guarantee. An incorporated association is an organisation that has a legal identity of its own, and it's recognised by federal and state governments and is separate and distinct from the individuals who form or make up the group. If you're an incorporated association, you'd be registered with Consumer Affairs Victoria and you would have a registration number. Another legal structure you may have and you could apply is a company limited by guarantee, and that is normally a legal structure that's recognised by ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. So not-for-profits can apply. Now, you may be auspiced by a not-for-profit organisation that is incorporated and able to accept financial and legal responsibility for the project. So an auspice is an agreement where an incorporated not-for-profit organisation agrees to support a community organisation or an individual that is not incorporated. So a letter of support would be required from the auspicing organisation with your application, as well as details that we request about your auspice. And if the application was successful, your auspice would receive, hold, and administer that grant for the term of the funding agreement. So they would be effectively taking on the responsibility. Now, who's not eligible to apply for a grant? An individual can't apply for a grant unless they are auspiced. A community organisation that is not incorporated unless they are auspiced, and a commercial for-profit organisation cannot apply for a grant. There's also a number of activities that will not be funded by council. And once again, you'll need to look at the guidelines for the full list. But essentially, applications may be deemed ineligible for funding if they are sought for activities that are not consistent with council priorities or the community grant objectives. So the objectives we referred to in the previous slide, earlier on in the presentation, and also those council priorities that I mentioned, you can find in the council plan and our health and wellbeing strategy. You also should not have commenced the program. So where an organisation has commenced a program and committed expenditure prior to signing an agreement for the grant, they will not be funded retrospectively. So that's very, very important. You must be starting from scratch. Sorry. Your activity should not have a religious, political, or curriculum purpose. That is really, really important. There's quite strict rules at council about not funding for those purposes. Also, if you are requesting fixed assets and equipment, building maintenance or capital improvements, that is not eligible for funding. So what we're talking about here is heating or cooling systems that are affixed to a wall, blinds that are fixed to a building, building works, or even facility maintenance. You cannot request funding in a grant for those things. Also, we provide catering. We will not provide catering or office social outings and gatherings unless it can be demonstrated that it's part of the delivery of the core project. Also, incomplete applications will automatically be deemed ineligible, including where you don't include quotes where they are required. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's very, very important that if you have expenses over $500 that a quote is provided. So moving on, what grant categories are available? I'll go through them now. There's a total of 5. The 3 that are on this page are what we call annual grants. They are all offered once a year, and applications for these opened on the 5th of Feb and will close on the 12th of March. For all of them, funding available is $3,001 to $20,000. The first one is a community development grant, which achieves community development outcomes that respond to the needs of Manningham's diverse community. The second one is an arts grant that supports activities that provide opportunity to participate in arts, culture, and heritage. And the third one is a festival and events grant that supports community-led festivals and events that attract visitors to Manningham and activate key locations. So moving on, we also offer small grants. Now, the small grants come in 2 streams. One is the community strengthening stream and the other is the equipment purchase stream. The purpose is to support community strengthening initiatives and equipment purchase to enhance the quality of life of Manningham residents. So for the community strengthening, you can apply for up to $3,000. For equipment purchase, funding of 50% of co-contribution up to $1,500. So we will offer up to a maximum of $1,500 and you would have to put in the balance. The timing for small grants, applications are open all year round. They are assessed quarterly, and for 2024, our next assessments will happen in May, August, and November. We also offer community partnership grants. These provide financial assistance beyond 12 months to provide specialist services and projects which respond directly to council strategic directions. So this is a larger program that would last up to 4 years. Now, community partnership grants offer up to $50,000 a year with a total of $200,000 available over 4 years for the one project. The community partnership grants are available every 4 years. They will be advertised and applications will open next year and they will commence in 2026. Okay, so just a summary of each grant. So community development grants focus on the needs of Manningham's diverse community, including those who may experience social isolation or disadvantage, older residents, people with disability, youth, and people from non-English speaking backgrounds. There is a notional allocation of 110,000 available this year for community development grants. When that all gets expended, we can't offer any more grants. So, it's awarded to that total. Some examples of community development grants include mental health and wellbeing projects that will engage people at risk of isolation through the delivery of activities that enhance participation and connections within the local community. Another one is an innovative initiative that will increase the community's understanding of gender equity by delivering a series of interactive and information workshops to drive cultural change. The next grant category is arts grants. They enable not-for-profit groups and organisations to deliver arts, cultural and heritage activities that reflect the diversity of Manningham's community and align with council plans and strategies. So it supports community art initiatives that contribute to the vibrancy and livability of Manningham and enables the delivery of community-led arts and cultural activities and encourages partnership, innovation and best practice. In 2024, a total of $50,000 will be available. An example is an arts activity that encourages Manningham residents to celebrate significant occasions. Another might be community arts initiatives such as an artist-led mural or performance, or it may be an artist-led place activation creative initiative. So we've got a lot of places in Manningham that we look to activate, and we would love to have arts activities happening in those places. Finally, for the annual grants is the Festival and Events Grant, and that enables not-for-profit groups and organisations to support community-led festival and events that attract visitors to Manningham and activate key locations. So we've had some fantastic events be held through the Festival and Events Grants. The notional allocation is $50,000. So an example of an event or festival is an event or festival that showcases Manningham's heritage and or cultural diversity. Another example is celebration of culturally significant dates that the whole community can participate in. And with such a culturally diverse municipality, it's wonderful to see a group celebrating a cultural event and seeing lots of other people that are not from that culture participating. And that's a really wonderful thing that happens in Manningham. Another one is emerging and new events or festivals that target local community engagement. So it could be something completely new or different, or festival and events that celebrate and support local history. So moving on to small grants. So small grants enable not-for-profit groups and organisations to deliver one-off innovative activities and minor equipment purchases that support community strengthening initiatives and enhance the quality of life of Manningham residents. The notional allocation for small grants is $90,000 in the year. So as I mentioned, there are two categories, the community strengthening and the equipment purchase. Applications are open all year round, and they need to be received by 30th of April, 31 July and 31 October to be considered for assessment in August and November 2024, and April, I should say, April, August, and November. Somehow April dropped out of my notes. So examples of small grants is a program that encourages and promotes children, parents, and grandparents to participate in a walking program. And that would encourage fitness and interaction between families and the community. Another one would be a seed project for a new idea that you might have. Or you could run an environmental festival that involves residents and offers volunteering and leadership programs. You might apply for equipment as long as it can be demonstrated to be integral to the success of the activity. So just for an example, you might be a local cricket club that needs nets for training, like safety nets. And, that's an integral item that you would need for your club. So that's the sort of thing you could apply for, but you need to demonstrate that it's integral to your activity. Moving on. Okay, so for annual funding in the annual grant categories is for one-off projects and activities. However, funding for a second year of a project or activity may be accepted in the community development, arts, and festival and events categories. To meet the criteria for second year funding, applicants will need to demonstrate how the second year expands on the initial project and demonstrates the need for additional funding. So generally, that annual funding, we're just looking to offer 1 year of funding and then to support you to get on your feet, and hopefully you can develop other partnerships and ways to secure your funding. Because we have limited funding in so many organisations, we like to spread it around. If you can justify a second year, that is fantastic, and we'd be happy to consider those sorts of applications. And then if you're looking at ongoing funding, that's when you start looking at our community partnership grants, which go for 4 years. You can always call us and talk to us about those options. And just a reminder that before you apply for a grant, please make sure that you've had a look at all the criteria and the funding available, and make sure that it fits in with your purposes. It's so important to really look at those guidelines and know what you're applying for. And so moving on, we want to look at assessment criteria for annual grants. So when you apply for a grant, you'll be asked to submit a response to the following assessment criteria. Please refer to the guidelines. This page is included in there. But just to run you through, you essentially need to respond to 4 questions. And those questions have a weighting which comes to 100%. So the first question is, what's the activity you're applying for and what will it achieve? That's a really important question that you need to articulate very clearly for us. That's worth 25%. Why is the activity needed? You need to justify the need for this activity. That has a weighting of 25%. Who will benefit from the activity? There are questions in the application about how many people will be participating, what percentage are Manningham residents, how will they benefit? Please thoroughly answer those questions, because you can see the weight of the scores. That one is 20%. And how will the funded activity be managed over the funding period? That's worth 30%. And that ties into our accountability question. Manningham is rigorous in terms of its awarding of grants, and we want to make sure whoever we award our grants to has the capacity to manage that grant, because they are using council funding. The small grants have slightly different weighting. The questions are quite similar, but they are different. So for small grants, the assessment criteria ask what is the activity you're applying for and what will it achieve, worth 25%. Why is the activity needed, worth 25%? Who will benefit from the activity, worth 25%? And how will the funded activity be delivered, and who will be responsible for its implementation? Um, in that final question, if you're applying for equipment, we want to see responses around who will service the equipment, where will you store it if it's expensive equipment. We want to make sure that you have those things in place. Now, what additional information do you need in your application? There's a checklist in the grant guidelines. Please refer to this checklist before you start your application to ensure that you've got all the necessary information that you need to complete the application. You by the way, you can save and go back to your application, but I've found that it is just so much easier if you just go through this checklist at the beginning, gather everything you need, and it makes the process a lot smoother. So what you need, what we will ask you for in the application to complete is a project plan, an evaluation framework, quotes for budgeted expenses, the latest copy of your organisation's financial statement. If you're a new organisation and you don't have a financial statement, it's sufficient to give us a bank statement with the name of your organisation on it. You're also going to have to provide your incorporation number or details of your auspice body. That's one that a lot of applications fall over on. So please make sure you have an incorporation number or an auspice, and current public liability insurance certificate. That must be a current certificate. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to look at some of these key components which are on the application. So moving on, you'll be asked to complete a project plan. The first time I saw one of these, I thought it looked daunting, and it can look daunting, but it's not. Like a project plan, this little table pretty much guides the implementation of your activity. And if you've thought through your program, it shouldn't be that difficult to complete. It essentially tells you what you are doing, who is doing it, and how we will know it's done and when it's going to be done. So the key task is, what tasks are you going to do? So you're going to establish a project committee. You're going to finalise activity objectives and evaluation members. You're going to confirm your venues for events. You're going to finalise and launch a marketing plan, etc. So you outline your key tasks. They don't need to be ultra detailed. We want key tasks. Next is the who. Who's going to be responsible for this? As you'll see in our example, we don't have one person. It's actually a good idea to have a couple of people responsible for different things. We like to see that because, of course, if one person is running a whole project and that person falls over in a heap one day with COVID or something, the whole program could fall over. So that's, if it's a small program, it's fine. But if you're applying for larger funding and something more complex, we do like to see that there's different people responsible. And then the next one is the how. So how will you demonstrate that you've achieved that task? So what will show that you've completed the task? List your key outputs. And finally, the date that you'll complete each task by. So just look at it at little bite sizes of your program. If you're having any problems with this one, just give us a call and we can talk you through it. Then moving on is, you'll also be required to complete an evaluation framework. So evaluation is important because it enables organisations to measure how well the activity was delivered and whether it achieved what it set out to do. So in this form, you're asked to outline program objectives or project objectives, your proposed outcomes, providing a measure or indicator of success, and then a timeline. Now, here it's really important that you've kept data throughout your project. So, how many committee members have you got? How many meetings did you have? How many people attended your event? Or, you can gather all this sort of data, and at the end, you'll be able to easily report on your outcomes, especially if you've set it up to begin with. So I think it's really important that you've set up those questions to begin with. So this evaluation reporting in the far right happens at the completion of your project. As you're setting it up, it's the first 4 columns that you need to put in those objectives, outcomes, and indicators. Okay, moving on to your budget. So you'll be asked to complete a budget, and your budget should reflect the scope of your activity and include all income and expenditure that relate to your activity. When you've completed your budget, so you'll do a budget for total income and a budget for total expenditure, it must balance. Essentially, that means the amounts should be the same. Include all income and expenditure items in the table and review your list to ensure that you don't leave anything out. So we will fund project management and administration costs for the project up to a maximum value of 20% of the total project. So we won't go any higher than that, but we will fund up to 20%. So as is demonstrated here, you must include all funding that are part of your activity or project. We ask that you put the amount you are seeking from Manningham Council. Also, then you can record all other income. That might include your organisation's financial contribution if they are making one. If you are raising funds through your activities, so in this one there's selling tickets at an event, you would include those funds. They're doing a chocolate drive here to raise funds for the activity. You'll include those funds. We also ask that if your organisation is making an in-kind contribution, that you note that as well. So in-kind support is non-financial support, and it can include things like a volunteer's time, which is what we've recorded here. It could be a free venue. It could be equipment that that your organisation is using, like a photocopier or stationery. You can include those, and we ask you to include those expenses as in kind because it helps us see the true total value of these projects, and it's very, very important. Now, if you've got volunteers participating, assisting with a project, each council allows a dollar amount for the value of volunteer hours. At Manningham, that's $45 an hour. And you would put in your volunteer hours and the dollar amount. So under in-kind contribution, you could include a free venue for X amount. You could include photocopier and stationery for X amount. It doesn't mean we're paying it. It just reflects the value of the project. So then you will also be required to fill in a budget expenditure. As you can see, the total amount at the bottom is 16,760, and that is exactly the same as the total amount in the previous slide, the income 16,760. Those two must match. Otherwise, we'll come back to you and very early when we're assessing them and say, fix it, please. It's not right. So with your budget expenditure, we want you to include all expenses. So here they've included project facilitator, which is costed. If you're going to include a paid individual to work on it, we want to see the breakdown of the cost per hour, how many hours they are working on it, and if it's over $500, we need a quote. So we'd ask you to write it like that. So here they've included materials for costumes and setup. So this is obviously an event or a performance. There's insurance, there's venue hire, equipment hire, a community bus to and from rehearsals, the advertising, flyers and posters, copyright for music score, and they've included that in-kind contribution as an expense, which we also included on the previous page as in kind over here. Okay, and so we're getting it to balance at 17,760. Really important to include all your expenses as well, because you don't want to fall short and then not be able to implement your project. So really scope that out well. Now, quotes are mandatory for all expenditure over $500. They can be submitted as a catalogue item that can be from the internet or a hard copy, or quotes from a service provider. Now, if you fail to submit a quote for an item over $500 in your budget, your application will be deemed ineligible. So it's very, very important. Now, don't include the GST in your budget from your quotes. So if your organisation is GST registered, Council will add the GST to your grant payment if you are successful. So as you can see here, the quote should include a date, the supplier details, including an ABN, a clear description of the items, make sure that it's listed in the budget for the same amount, and don't include GST. And also, when you are attaching your quotes, make sure they're legible. So often we receive them and they're not legible, and that makes it very, very difficult for us. So please make sure that you check that when you've uploaded it, that it's legible. Okay, so Council's grant program application process is managed through an online portal called Smarty Grants. You can access Smarty Grants via Council's website at the addresses listed here. Now, this is the front page of the Smarty Grants web page. You will select which grant category you're applying for, and that will link you to the Smarty Grants login page. You must come in through the Manningham portal. It's because that's linked up to our applications. Now you'll be required, so this is the login page. You're going to be required to have an email address and password. If you are not set up, you'll have to register. And just a couple of tips that when you're registering with Smarty Grants, please register using your organisation's generic email address. Only one email is permitted per organisation. Don't use your personal email address, because this email will be the main contact for the duration of the funded activity. If someone happens to leave your organisation and is the main contact, then we lose our contact for the grant. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you save your application every 5 minutes, because you're doing all this hard work. You need to keep saving. It doesn't auto save. Allow enough time to upload your files. So if applications close at 5 o'clock, don't upload them at 2 minutes to 5, because you might find that you miss the deadline. There will be prompts in the application form to show where files need to be uploaded. So please make sure to be wary of that. Make sure you press submit when you finalise your application. If you do not receive a confirmation of submission email, then you should presume that your submission has not been submitted. And please remember your password, because you might want to apply next year again. So now these are our key dates for 2024. So for community development, arts and festival and events grants, they opened on Monday 5 Feb. The grants will close at Tuesday, 12 March, 5 p.m. That is a hard deadline. We are not flexible at all for late applications. It's just not fair on other applicants. So please meet that deadline. And, my rule is always get it in the day before. Just make sure you get it in, because things always go pear-shaped at the last minute with grants. So after grants close, they go through an assessment process. They go through an eligibility and assessment process, as I said. First, they go through an eligibility check. If they get through that, then they go to assessment. They will be assessed and reviewed and recommended by our community grants assessment panel. That panel is comprised of 2 Manningham senior officers and 3 community members. So it's actually community members as well. The majority of the panel is community members assessing your grants. It'll go to panel in June, and recommendations will be made at the end of June to council for funding. You'll be notified in July if you're successful. Now, small grants are open all year long unless we run out of funding. The grant cutoff for small grants is 30th of April, 31 July, and 31 October. I'm repeating myself. I know I said it earlier. And they will be in assessment and endorsement of the panel recommendations will happen in May, August, and November, and you'll be notified in June, September, and December of outcomes. Okay, so what happens if your application is successful? All successful applicants are required to enter into a funding and services agreement with council. We call it a FASA. It's essentially a contract between our funding organisation and council that clearly outlines very, very important things about this grant. So it outlines the purpose of the funding, the dollar amount of the funding, the period over which the grant applies, and the rights and responsibilities of all people, all parties to the fund FASA, and the terms and conditions of the grant. It's really important that that you sign off that FASA before you get your funding. So we won't release any funding unless that is signed off. Normally you would get that within a few days of getting an offer. And so what sort of conditions are in the grant? These are a few key ones. Firstly, funds should be used for the intended purpose as set out in the FASA. So activities need to be completed in 12 months from the receipt of funding, unless an alternative arrangement is made with council. Marketing material for your program or event must include the Manningham logo and acknowledge council and be approved by council before you release that material. Now, you'll be asked to complete an activity completion report within 2 months of completing your project. That activity completion report, you'll submit receipts for all expenditure items listed in the budget. Failure to provide receipts may require funds to be repaid to council, so please maintain good records. If your project changes along the line, you please contact us and we can put through a grant variation. We don't want to get to the end of the grant and look at your project completion report, activity completion report, and see that different things have happened to what we funded. That is not where we want to be at the end of a program. If anything changes, and things do change, just call us and let us know. Okay, so for further information, please refer to our website or email grants@manningham.vic.gov.au and you'll get a quick response from the grants team. If you haven't found what you're looking for, if your grant objectives are not aligned with Manningham's grant objectives, you can go to Grant Finder, and this is the web address, and you can look up. There's a whole lot of other grants that you could apply for, so that's another option. My details and my colleague Maria's details are here, and you can contact us on those telephone numbers directly or email us at that grants email.